Hi, so I'm Jeff Sass. I'm the CMO of .club Domains, and I'm joined on stage with Michele Van Tilborg, who's the president of .club Domains and comes to us, to the industry with a lot of experience both on the registry and registrar side of the fence. And Colin Campbell is the founder and chairman of .club Domains, and Colin's background also is very deep in the industry. He's one of the co-founders of Two Cows, which a lot of people may not realize. And he's also one of the founders of Hostopia, one of the leading hosting companies in the telecommunications arena. And he's been a very successful serial entrepreneur with a lot of other businesses as well. This is supposed to be part of the educational series of Namescon this year. So I want to just gauge who's in the room a little bit. How many people in the room are a registry operator or work for a registry operator? Okay, so quite a few. How many people are registrars? None. So we could talk a lot about the registrars here. That's good. That's good to know. How many people are domain investors? Okay, handful. And how many people are considering, regardless of which category you just fell in, how many of you are thinking about becoming a registry, either by potentially acquiring an existing registry or when round 2 opens up, applying for new extensions? Okay, great. Well, hopefully this will be good information, especially for you folks, because we're supposed to give you kind of a deep dive into what is a registry. So a shorter name for the session is just what the F is a registry, right? And we'll take a deeper dive beneath the surface of a registry operator. So .club, of course, is a registry, so we can give you some examples from our experiences, but we'll also talk about just some of the basics of, kind of registry 101. So what is a registry operator? So as we go deep beneath the surface, we'll talk a little bit about what's the role and the obligations of a registry operator. We'll use some of the .club examples and tell you a little bit more about our experience and some of the numbers and where we are today after all these years. We'll talk a little bit about the business models and the different business models that a registry operator can think about operating under. We'll talk about distribution, how do we get our names distributed and sold, and then above the iceberg, we'll talk a little bit about marketing and how do we get awareness and exposure and drive demand for our domains. And this will be an interactive session, so please feel free to raise your hand and interrupt at any time. Hopefully Colin and Michele will chime in, and then we'll have lots of room at the end for questions for all three of us, because we've got a lot of knowledge and experience here on the stage. So without further ado, we'll dive right in, go underneath there. So what is a registry operator, technically? So I looked at a very reliable source, Wikipedia, as opposed to going to ICANN for their definition. And a registry operator maintains all administrative data of a domain and generates a zone file, which contains the addresses of the name servers for each domain. Each registry is an organization that manages the registration of domain names within the domains for which it is responsible, controls the policies of the domain name allocation, and technically operates the domain. So the three key things there are really managing the registration, controlling the policies. Setting the policies is very important. In every new extension that's come out, they don't necessarily have the same policies. And this creates potential confusion in the marketplace, because when a registrant goes to a registrar, they're probably assuming that all domains are equal, and that's actually not necessarily the case. So the registry operator has to determine what those policies are. And then arguably the most important thing, because everything falls apart without it, is we're responsible for technically operating that domain. We have to manage that underlying technology and database so that if you go to GoDaddy and register a domain name, an instant later someone can't go to another registrar and register that same domain name and the technology that creates the domains. One of the fascinating things about being a domain registry as a business is we sell products that don't exist yet until the buyer makes them up. And what I mean by that is there's no warehouse of inventory holding every permutation of a .club domain. Someone can go to GoDaddy, make up a word, stick .club on the end, and suddenly that exists and they can buy it and we get paid. So it's very unusual. I don't know of any other industry where the customer creates the inventory that is then sold to them. So it's a very interesting thing. And that's all handled by the underlying technology. And we'll talk about some of the choices you have there. When you look at the timeline to become a registry operator, there are several steps that typically we all had to follow, and you'll likely have to follow similar steps in round 2. Of course, the first step is to apply for the names that you're interested in. So you have to go through the application process. And then if you are the one who gets your application approved, meaning that you were perhaps the only person who applied for that particular domain, or if there were multiple applicants, you're the one that survived and won the contention set, then you go to contract with ICANN. And then, of course, after you go to contract, you go through the technical process of delegation and actually making your domain extension technically available on the internet. And then you need to go through a land rush and sunrise period. Sunrise makes the names available to copyright and trademark holders, so they have first chance at acquiring the domain names that match their copyright or trademark. And then, of course, finally, you launch to the general public with your general availability stage. So that's kind of the basic steps to becoming a registry operator. So we'll take a look at how .club went through that process and what our experience was. So here's an example of how one registry did it, and that's .club. So our process was a similar timeline, and I'll give you the actual dates here so we can put this whole new process in perspective. So the applications for the round were due in January of 2012. So we got our application in by January of 2012. June was reveal day. In June of 2012 was when ICANN revealed who applied for what. And that's when you found out if you were the only applicant for a particular domain, or if there were multiple companies or multiple individuals who also applied for that domain. So when we went through reveal day, we found out that 2 other companies had also applied for .club. Donuts, which everyone is familiar with, the largest registry operator there is right now, and Merchant Law Group, which is a legal firm out of Canada that applied for, I believe, 8 strings at the time in the beginning. So we were in competition with these people. So the next phase of the process, of course, is to spend a year negotiating with them, and nothing happened. But actually, before we got there, shortly after reveal day was the ICANN meeting in Prague. And even though we were in competition with 2 other companies, we actually showed up as if we already owned .club. We went to the Prague ICANN meeting, we took out a booth, we put .club on the booth. Colin and I were there with our .club shirts on, similar to what we're wearing today, and we really presented ourselves as the registry operator, even though technically we were not, and we were still in competition with 2 other companies. It was a little bit of visioning what would happen in the future and trying to, if you build it, they will come. So we were very aggressive in terms of positioning ourselves as the registry operator, even before we technically had the right to do so. But, always be marketing. So after spending about a year trying to negotiate between the 3 of us, we really weren't able to come to any type of arrangement where either we buy each other out or partner or whatever. It never came to fruition. So we ended up participating in what turned out to be the very first private auction for the new domain extensions. And that took place in June of 2013. So the way that worked, for those of you who aren't familiar, and this is important because I'm not sure how it will be handled in round 2, because in round 1 it was an unusual circumstance where the applicants, if they all agreed to it, and 100% of the applicants had to agree. So if there were 8 applicants for an extension, if 1 applicant held out, then they could not go to the private auction. They had to go to an ICANN auction. And the difference between the ICANN auction and a private auction is, in round 1, in a private auction, the losers actually shared the proceeds of the auction. In an ICANN auction, ICANN keeps all the proceeds of the auction. So there's a big difference there. So the private auctions provided an opportunity for the applicants to recover their application fee and then some in most cases. So we were part of the first private auction. It was a 4-day process. It's done online. Colin was sitting in front of a computer, going back and forth. Every hour, I think, you log in and the price goes up and you see if the other applicants are still in the running. We actually set up a camera in our office at the time, just kind of randomly, up in the corner. And so we actually captured the moment that we won the auction on video, which was pretty interesting. So this was June 2013, and this was totally legit and random, not staged. We just had the camera up in the corner for 4 days. And periodically I had to change the battery in the camera, so we just happened that the camera was live.
They're going to have a return.
Are we both in?
Everyone's still in, right?
We got the name.
What? No.
Seriously?
No. No.
Seriously?
You're kidding. Wait a second.
Seriously?
Are you kidding?
I'm crying, I was in it.
Oh my
Seriously?
Oh my God! I told you! I told you! Woo!
Oh my God!
Seriously?
Wait,
You're not joking?
Let's get to work.
Press
Press
release.
release. Press release. Get to work.
Stop the lawyers. Stop the lawyers.
Stop the lawyers.
Seriously?
Call the lawyers.
I'm calling the lawyers.
Call the
Wait,
lawyers.
we have
Okay,
money.
let's
We
just
have
confirm
money to
that I'm not
spare.
wrong here.
Yeah.
Dirk,
Please
look,
confirm
look over his shoulders. Make sure he's right.
Before I call the lawyers.
Contention sets. We won.
Oh.
Woo!
We won this, guys. But let's get the press ready. We're not ready.
Let's get Bridget. Call Bridget. Call Bridget.
Holy
We got.
Bridget.
So that was June of 2013, a long time ago. And then it took another year almost before we launched. In January, we went through our Sunrise and Land Rush period. So I'll talk a little bit about Sunrise. Sunrise was tough, and even to this day, really very few of the new TLDs that have come out have had what we would consider a very successful Sunrise period. A lot of that ties into the lack of general awareness. You know, brands didn't really understand, do they really need to protect the domain? You know, what is this new program? And it was a tough time because previously, when things like .XXX came out, they had enormously successful Sunrise periods. So I think everyone had their expectations much too high. And I think one of the things we would warn new applicants and people who are releasing their TLDs now for the first time is to think hard about Sunrise and don't get your expectations too high. Because with all these domains out there, you know, it's really not necessary for every brand to protect their trademark in every single TLD comes out. I mean, you really have to be smart about it. Think about if the TLD is relevant for your particular brand and to the point where it makes sense to protect it. You know, there's a lot of programs out there like DPML that, you know, provide protection across a broad swath of domains, but really the trademark holders should think about what domain extensions actually matter for their trademark. So Sunrise is not what it's all cut up to be, so to speak. I don't know if any of you want to add anything to that. Feel free to kick in. Land Rush also, you know, Land Rush is the period of time. So Sunrise gives trademark holders the opportunity to get their domain that matches their trademark first before it's available to the public. The idea behind that is to give them a chance to prevent it from ending up in the hands of anyone else because they can buy it first. And it's typically priced higher than what the general availability price will be. Land Rush is the same idea. It's an opportunity for people who really want a particular name to get it before it's available to the general public, but it's priced higher than the general availability is. So they pay a premium for having that opportunity to grab the name before it's generally available to the public. We did what was a fairly standard Land Rush period back then, where we basically just had a higher price. But again, with awareness not being as high, I don't think the Land Rush met our expectations. And I think if we were doing it over today, we would probably do it differently. Since we launched, a number of other registries experimented with different models for Land Rush, the most popular probably being EAP, which is the early access program. And during an early access program, it's kind of like a Dutch auction, I think is the term for it, where on day one, it's at its highest price. And each day for a period of time, perhaps a week or 10 days, the price goes down each day until at the end it's at the general availability price. And the logic behind that is someone who really, really wants that name will pay the premium on that early day, because if they wait, it gets lower. Someone else, you know, the lower it gets, the more likely it is that someone else will grab that name. So it provides an opportunity for someone who really wanted that name to get it at a high premium, and every day that high premium gets reduced. And I think if we were launching today, probably we would do Land Rush that way as opposed to what we did. Would you agree?
Yeah, or a variation.
Yeah, or some variation of that. So something to think about if you're becoming a registry is how you want to handle your Land Rush period. And then of course after that, you get to launch. So we launched for general availability in May of 2014. So in a few months it'll be 6 years, which is hard to believe. And when we launched .club, we wanted to do something different. You know, we only had one extension, just Club. We wanted to get a lot of attention. We wanted to do something that was atypical for the domain industry. So we did a big launch campaign around the rapper 50 Cent. Because at the time, and still today really, if you think about 50, you think about the song In the Club. So we thought it was a logical connection to draw attention to .club. And we did a big launch party in New York. Some of the people in the room were there. 50 Cent was there, 50 or Curtis as we're able to call him. He, of course, famously made a mistake when he was giving a little speech and referred to it as club.com before he corrected himself. It was pretty funny. But what we did also was we wanted the registrars to be able to benefit from this. So we actually, part of our deal with Fiddy was we had the right to use his likeness in promotion for .club. So we provided all of our registrars worldwide with banners they could use with a picture of 50 Cent saying, you know, Fiddy is in the club, you can be in the club too, et cetera, et cetera. So it was a nice cross promotion, nice way to get attention early on. So that's when we launched in May of 2015, so it's been a long time. So to give you a quick update of some of our numbers, here we are all these years later. So .club, we've done well. You know, we're very proud of what we've accomplished in these years. You know, we've got a great team led by Michele that's done a terrific job. Registrations to date, top line, a little under 1.5 million, over 1.4 million top line registrations to date. But that's not the number that we care about more. We're far more interested in the actual usage of .club, and we're very proud of our usage numbers. We have over 300,000 live active websites that are using a .club domain as their primary web address. So that's not parked pages or redirects, those are actual live .club websites. And that really is most important. You know, usage, Dan Schindler, one of the founders of Donuts, used to always say, usage begets usage. Well, the way he said it was, usage begets usage. But Dan Schindler would say that, and it's true. You know, when people see a website in use, that's going to make them aware of this extension, give them the comfort that they're not the first ones to use it. There are actually successful businesses out there using this domain extension. It minimizes the risk they feel like they're taking. So we really feel that usage is arguably one of the most important metrics. And when someone's using a website, they're very likely, pretty much 100%, to renew that domain as long as that business is active. So the renewal rates on live websites are significantly higher than anything else. So it's a very important metric, very important thing to focus on. Also, we're very proud that our registration base is pretty diverse. So we have over 220,000 unique registrants. So those are unique registrants. So our registrations are not concentrated in a very small number of holders. And within that group, we have over 180,000 single domain registrants. So 180,000 people own just one .club name, and that could be the one that they're using. So they're not just speculators, although we have obviously many speculators in the .club space as well. Club was unusual, and one of the reasons I think Colin chose to apply for it is the fact that club, the word club, is a very global recognized word. The word club is spelled the same and understood in many different languages, from Spanish and Italian and French to Chinese, Korean, and Japan. You know, in China, although I won't be going there now, but when I've been to China in the past, you'll see signs that say, you know, Chinese characters and the word club, C-L-U-B in English. So it's recognized as club. So we have a very global reach with our registrations. We have registrars and registrations in over 170 different countries. And then premium sales. For the domain investors in the room, you know, we focused on premium sales right from the beginning. We've been very active within the domain investor community right from the beginning. We attended our first traffic conference in 2013 before we had launched even. And we've done cumulatively over $7.5 million in premium name sales just for the extension .club. So that's an important part of our business model, of course. So that gives you a little sense of where Club is today, and let's talk more about the registry business models that are available to you. So if you're going to become a registry, we'll talk a little bit about some of the fixed costs, because there are fixed costs involved in being a registry operator. There are a number of different pricing strategies that you can go through, and we chose one, and other registries have chosen different ones, and many registries have shifted their pricing strategy as time has gone on, so you have to decide that. And then there are a number of challenges I want to talk about that we face as registry operators in the industry. So when you think about the different business models, you need to decide if you're going to be, like .club did, a single domain registry operator. And there are advantages and disadvantages to being a single domain registry operator versus a portfolio operator. Companies like Radix and Donuts and MMX have quite a few domains. We have one. With one domain, one of the advantages has been focus, right? We were able from day one to focus solely on the success of one of our children. We only had one kid, .club, and all of our energy, all of our resources went toward and goes toward to this day the success of .club. If you choose to be a portfolio registry operator and you have many children, it's hard to pick a favorite child sometimes, and your focus is going to be split amongst the different TLDs in your portfolio. You know, Karn talked a little bit about in the previous session how Radix handles that, and you know, that's perhaps a disadvantage of being a portfolio holder. The flip side is, as a portfolio holder, you have economies of scale. You can amortize your resources across multiple domains. With .club, everything we do is just that one domain. So our overhead is all focused on one domain. It's not split amongst multiple domains. So, you know, there are positives and negatives on both sides. You have to decide what your strategy is as a registry operator, whether you want to be applying for a single domain or whether you want to be a portfolio holder. Generic or niche domains, you know, that's another decision you have to make when choosing a domain name to be the operator of. You know, if there's a lot of generic domains out there, you know, .web is generic, .online is generic, there are many others that are out there, and then there are many niche domains that focus on a very specific market. .law was mentioned earlier, that's niche obviously for the legal community. There's been .realtor, that was focused very much on the realtor market. There are many domains in the Donuts portfolio you would consider more niche domains. Different strategies, different opportunities, so you have to decide what you're going to go after, and whether you choose generic domains or niche domains is going to drive a lot of your business and marketing strategy, because they're different opportunities. It also may change the opinions of certain registrars, where certain registrars find it easier to promote within their system a more generic domain than they might find being able to promote and sell a more niche domain. So you need to decide if your domain is going to be generic or niche. And then also you have to decide if it's going to be an open domain or restricted. Again, as I mentioned earlier, your role as a registry operator is to set the policies so you can decide, is this domain going to be open? Can anyone who wants register the domain? .club is an open domain. There are no requirements or restrictions. Anyone, no matter what they are, what they do, who they are, they can register a domain. .club domain. There are other extensions that are restricted. .bank, you have to meet certain requirements to register a .bank name. You know, so, and there are some that are strict, very strict restrictions. There are some that are looser restrictions but have some restrictions. So you need to decide what policy makes the most sense for your name. And again, it ties into the strategy and the niche. For .bank, it's very important for it to be restricted because the whole idea is to have that trust. And if just anyone can call themselves a bank, it diminishes the trust and it diminishes the value of that extension. With .club, we see it as more of a hybrid. It's really a generic with meaning, in that club is pretty generic. You know, it's a widely used term. You can put any word in front of it and it sort of makes sense. But at the same point, it has some meaning. When you think of club, you think of community, you think of passion, you think of people coming together around a common interest. So we consider it a generic with meaning. So these are some of the decisions and choices you'll need to make as you decide what extensions you want to acquire or apply for. The thing to remember most, though, and proof of the pudding is we're standing here in 2020 talking to you about this, this is not a sprint, right? This is most definitely a marathon. And in fact, you know, as I said, here we are 8 years later, 8 years after we applied, and .club is still slogging along. We hired Bernie Sanders to pose for that picture. It looks like, I don't know. But it's definitely a marathon. And I think, you know, this was talked about on the panel just before this. I think a lot of people went into this business thinking things were going to move very quickly and not really recognizing just how much of a marathon this process is. So it takes a lot of time. Fixed costs. If you're going to be, and again, feel free to interrupt with any questions at any time. And my companions on stage, feel free to chime in. I'm happy to talk forever, but you know, no problem. Fixed costs. So if you want to become a registry operator, no matter what type of name you choose, there are some fixed costs that you'll have to deal with. One of the biggest ones, and it is your back end. Sorry. I always got confused when I first came into this industry. Everyone was talking about, who's your back end? Who's your back end? I said, hey, hashtag me too. I don't want to answer that question. But it turns out that the back end is very important because that's your back end provider, the technology back end. So you can choose to build your own, and some registries have gone in that direction, typically the bigger ones, you know. Donuts has its own registry backend, Registry, of course, and some others. But most of us, certainly the smaller registry operators or single domain operators, where there's no economy of scale there, we choose to outsource our backend to a third party. In our case, it's Newstar. There are a number of great companies, many of whom are here, who provide that service to registry operators. So you have to decide if you're going to do it yourself or outsource it. The thing is, it is absolutely a fixed cost. Most of those deals with a back-end service provider are on a per registration basis. So basically, it's almost like if you were a manufacturer, those are your manufacturing costs, your cost of goods. Every domain that's registered, the back-end service provider is going to get some fee based on that domain.
Yeah, I think it's also important to connect early. If you're going to apply for new gTLDs, you want to connect with a provider so that they can help you with the application, do it correctly. The fees generally are relatively low that these providers charge because they're really looking for your business, you know, once you do get the name and it's delegated.
Other fixed costs, ICANN fees, right? As a registry operator, we have to pay ICANN for every registration, and there's an annual minimum. So there's a minimum fee you'll have to pay to ICANN, whether you sell 10 domains or 10 million domains, you're going to have to meet that minimum, and then of course it's variable on top of the minimum. You'll be paying based on the volume of domains you sell. So that's another sort of fixed or manufacturing cost of being an operator. Yes?
I'm just wondering, round 2, do you see those ICANN fees going down?
I don't see the future, so I don't really see where they're going. You know, obviously there's been a lot of controversy about the current fees, and there've been a number of registries who pushed back to ICANN, and right. Proposals have been put forth to change the structure. But I'm not aware of any announcements that have made as to what will happen or how it'll be addressed.
Some of the chatter that I've heard at ICANN is that they may actually raise the application fee. ICANN really doesn't have enough money in their banks. I'm joking here. They have $300 million from the auction funds, but you know, they are an organization that is quite bureaucratic, and you know, they are very concerned also about some gTLDs that have had spam or phishing or other, you know, sort of elements that can hurt the security of the internet. So they're very careful in that they don't want it to be too open, I think, and I think that it's possible we could see a higher application fee.
Other fixed costs, you have to, you're required by contract to provide data escrow. To Colin's point about spam, if you want to have a clean namespace, you're probably going to pay a provider to provide some sort of an anti-spam and security service. That's a cost as well.
For .club specifically, we put a lot of effort in keeping our zone clean. So we have a lot of expense in the anti-spam arena, where registrations coming in within 24 hours, if they look like they are a spammer or are a spammer, we actually put them on server hold. So we do this for the long-term health of the extension, as well as the reputation of all new gTLDs in a way. Because I think what you can see today is that there are some new gTLDs that are actually really hurting this space. You guys agree? Because they let a lot of spammers come in, then they start going through these mail servers, and the administrators then just kind of make a blanket decision, oh, all new gTLDs are spam, we won't let them come through the filters. So this is a really big issue, and it's something that we're very passionate about, that we feel needs to be addressed in the space, and something you should consider if you are going to become a registry, and the implications.
And another fixed expense is continuing operations, escrow. ICANN requires registries to put an amount of money in escrow for a number of years to ensure continuing operations. That's a variable number based on your business plan. In .club's case, we had to put $160,000 in escrow, so it's not a fixed expense in that you will eventually get the money back, but it definitely eats up some of your use of cash.
And I will say that that escrow fee has to be paid prior to the application. So you actually put that money into escrow before you even know you're going to win the TLD. So you not only have your, let's say, $200,000 application fee, you might also have to pay anywhere from $50,000 to $150,000, depending on the volume you expect for your TLD. In fact, actually, they just upped to $300,000. I can't if your volume is too high. So, so you have to consider that in your business plan as well.
Then, of course, fixed overhead. You know, you have to decide your overhead. So .club arguably has a pretty large overhead for a single TLD. We have around 12 employees and have had, you know, which is a lot for a single TLD. But that was a choice we made with the vision and the plan to build a more global brand and to go after sort of a larger number of registrations. There are other registry operators that operate with a single employee, and they outsource, you know, other stuff, and they work more closely with their backend service provider to provide other services beyond just the technical backend and help them with marketing and other things. So you'll have to decide, you know, what type of an overhead is going to be required for you based on the domains you apply for and based on what your plans are for those domains. So overhead's the other fixed expense. And then if you have a global domain and you want to go into other markets, there could be additional expenses. China, for example, if you choose to offer your domain in China, there's a whole set of additional fixed expenses, including per registration expenses, in order to meet the requirements of the Chinese government and sell your domain through Chinese registrars.
Yeah, in the case of China, actually it is literally like having almost another gTLD, because you're required to have a second backend, which is located in a Chinese national that's approved by the government. Also, you're required to have employees on the ground. So it's quite expensive, and it can be as expensive as just being, you know, in the Western world. So you could look at like a 50 to 75% increase in cost.
Yeah, so those are really the fixed costs that you should think about as a registry operator. And then how are you going to cover those costs? You have to decide what kind of a pricing model you want to have. And I'll quickly just go through a few of the variations. So there's the low model, which means your initial first year registration and your renewal price is more or less the same and typically not too expensive. That's what .club follows, pretty much in the same vein as .com. So our registration price for the first year is the same as our renewal price, and it's low. Our wholesale price is under $10. Then there's the low-high, where that first year registration might be one price, and then your renewal prices are higher than that price. So there are some domains out there where maybe the first year registration might be $15 and then the renewal might be $25 or $30 on an ongoing basis. So you have the low-high model. Then of course you have the high model. So the high model is both your first year registration fee and your renewal fee are the same, but they're pretty high. Maybe they're $100 or $200 or $300 a year as your high model. And then there are hybrid models where you may have a higher first year registration and then more of a medium, a higher than average but lower renewal rate. So there's different models to choose from. And then of course you have to apply these models to your premium name strategy. So premium names are really important. So for us, .club, our two sources of revenue are regular registrations and premium names. In one case, it's high volume, low margin. We get a lot of registrations. We don't make very much on each one. The other is the opposite. It's low volume, but very high margin. We don't sell as many premium names, but we make much more money with much higher margin on the premium names. So you need to decide what your premium name strategy is. And again, in the premium world, there are similar pricing differences. There's high-low, which is what we do. So the first year registration of a premium name could be very high. We've sold premium names for over $100,000. Their renewal, even if they paid $140,000 for that first year, their renewal is going to be our low, you know, 10 or 15 bucks a year. So it's the high-low model. And we feel that that gives stability to the business owners who may want to register their names. They know what they're paying up front, and they know where they stand going forward, and it's manageable. A number of other registries do the high model, where instead of $100,000 for a domain up front, it might be $10,000 a year, but that's $10,000 a year in perpetuity. So, we feel for us that doesn't support smaller businesses that we wanted to support, so we chose not to do the high model, but a number of registries, Matt talked about it in the previous session, have been very successful, and Karin mentioned an example for Radix as well. Other companies have been successful with the high model. Then there's the HighMedium model, where your initial registration is very high, and the renewals are lower than the initial registration, but higher than the general availability renewals. So it's kind of a hybrid model. And then really you have to think about how are you going to distribute your premium names. Tiered premiums is now, we think, the most effective way, and that means your premiums are available through the registrar channel along with your general availability names, and it's called tiered because we have different tiers of premium name pricing. So we have premium pricing tiers that run from as low as $20 retail to as high as $19,000 retail that are sold through the registrar channel. When we launched .club originally, we did not do tiered premiums. We actually launched where all our premium names were available through CEDO and through MLS in that form, which limited the number of registrars that could offer our premium names and limited their awareness. And we found, even though we ended up lowering some prices to fit into these tiers, we found that selling them through the registrar channel through these tiers has been much more effective. And we sell several dozen premium names on a daily basis through the registrar channel. It's done very well. So we probably would recommend, if we were advising someone who's going to be a registry operator, we would strongly recommend that you put together a tiered premium program.
I remember earlier session before us, there was discussion about innovation. Having been in the industry before the new gTLDs, I would say that doing the tiered premium pricing has been, in my mind, one of the biggest innovations, because it's really made the premium names accessible where people go, which is to registrars in the registration channel path.
Yes?
Is there a registrar markup on the pricing at all?
Yeah, so typically the domain industry, which is unusual to people who aren't familiar with it, is very much like a traditional retail business in that as a registry operator, we're essentially the manufacturer, and we sell our domains, our products, to the registrars, the retailers, at a wholesale price, and they mark it up and they sell it to the end user. So again, it goes into that pricing model, what you decide. The only requirement we have from ICANN is we have to offer the same wholesale price to all registrars. How they mark it up is going to be different.
Yeah, it varies by registrar, right? So more, your low price registrars are anywhere from like 20 to 30%. And then some of the higher ends might be, 50% plus. So it really depends which registrar you go to.
And that's why you'll see the variance in prices at registrars. We're actually charging them the exact same wholesale price, but they decide how much of a margin they want to take. And then there are promotions and other things that go on top of that. Some of the challenges you'll face as a registry operator. So one that was talked about a lot in the previous channel is there's generally a lack of awareness of the new domain extensions. So starting a business as a registry operator is going to be challenging because you have to figure out how are you going to create that demand? How are you going to get people to be interested in your domain? So that's, lack of awareness and lack of demand are really two issues that we all face as registry operators, and I suspect that the new registry operators that come into the fray with round 2 will be faced with the same challenges. Another one that's really important that Michele touched on earlier is the lack of trust. There's a significant lack of trust in many cases on the consumer side in these new domain extensions. Part of that is because they're not familiar with them. Part of it is because we get a lot of bad press. For example, just this week, in all of the coverage of the PIR thing, the New York Times made reference to all the new TLDs, and the context they put it in is odds are that several years later, you've still never interacted with a website ending in one of those domains, and if you have, it was probably only a means of delivering spam or malware to your computer. So unfortunately, because of what's happened with a number of extensions that have been abused, There is a perception out there in the general public, in the general media, that these new extensions are not necessarily as trustworthy as some of the legacy extensions. And that's one of the challenges that we all face and that we're all making progress in, but it's definitely still something that you need to be cognizant of going into this business.
And I can add a few challenges as well. First of all, if you build it, they will come. I think a lot of people think all I have to do is just get the application in, get the name, and I'm just gonna make a lot of money. You have to do a lot of work. I mean, we've gone to China 14 times, each of us, right, just to get that market started. I mean, it's a lot of work. We've done probably 100 trade shows, a lot of industry shows, clubs so broad and cover so many different areas. You really do have to work it and also connect with the registrars. The other thing I'll say is, from a funding perspective, we did a private round of $8.2 million prior to the auction. We later had to raise additional funds to continue the market, and so we've raised about $12 million to date for the launch and including the auction and the launch of .club. The one thing I will say is, it's very important if you need investors for your application in gTLD that you have very patient investors. And I'm telling you that the banks will not support these types of business models. And also high interest loans could kill you as well, because sometimes, as you see with .club, it took us 3-4 years before we actually went live from the time we actually started. The other thing that be aware of is big corporations. Obviously brands, we talked a little bit about the lack of interest in Sunrise earlier on. Also domainers, neither groups will really support your TLD for the most part. I think the domainers are burnt out at this point. So if you're expecting to make additional revenue from the big corporations or domainers, that's probably a flawed strategy. Registries are just going to launch you. That's not true at all. The registries have not launched. A number of them have not launched a lot of gTLDs, especially ones that have unique policies that make it a lot of work for them to launch. I wouldn't, in the next round, I wouldn't be surprised if we see registries charging a $50,000 slotting fee or something in order for you to get your name registered in that channel. But that's one thing you can't necessarily rely on, is that all the registrars are just going to launch you. The last thing I'll say is that the process for bidding and applying for a new domain extension, even if all the rules remain the same, and I think actually for the most part they likely will, ICANN doesn't like to change things. The fact of the matter is the rules will change. The number of people who are going to come in as speculators on gTLDs probably is going to spike up on the next round. And what we've seen in these auction environments is that if there are more than 3 or 4 applicants, it's more likely that particular string is going to go to an ICANN auction. It just takes one person to say, I don't want to go into a private auction or private settlement, to send that string into an ICANN auction, and you lose all of your application fees. You lose everything you've put into it. So there is ways of withdrawing earlier to try to, but you still lose a substantial portion of your investment from day one. So the rules are going to change at the next round.
I'm going to speed up a little bit, so I'm going to make sure you have time for questions. So metrics, just want to talk a moment about metrics. Metrics are very important, but what metrics matter? Too much focus on DUMs is dumb. And as was mentioned in the previous session, DUMs is domains under management, right? Everyone's focused on the top line registrations, but that's not what necessarily drives revenue. As a business, you want to focus on what really drives revenue. And as we talked about before, what drives revenue is usage, right? When people are using your domain, they're going to renew the domain, they're going to expose it to more people, so that's going to drive revenue. And we've recently focused on a metric that we call subscribers, right? So what's important to us is to see the growth in subscribers. And we define the subscribers as someone who's paid full price for their registration. So a full price registration could be a registration at full price, it could be a transfer. Those are all full price registrations. A premium name sale is a full price registration. So that's a subscriber, or someone who has renewed the domain at least once. When we get to that renewal point, then they're a subscriber. We don't count that first year discounted registration as meaningful. That's really a trial registration, And growing that number is not meaningful to us. You know, what's meaningful to us is growing the number of actual subscribers as defined. And it's really important that you figure out what's the right metric that's going to move your business forward. Too many people are caught up in that top line registration number, which is packed with what we would call trial domains that don't necessarily turn into real revenue. So that's really important to think of your metrics. Moving ahead to distribution, obviously, the way this business is structured, we as a registry have to sell our products through registrars. Now, a registry can be a registrar. That's a business choice to make. Ray King and Pork Bun has done very well, being both the registry for a number of extensions and also operating a registrar. Other registries have done that. That's a choice you have to make. Otherwise, you're faced with the registrar channel, and there are a lot of registrars out there, and managing that process is very complicated. Just ask Michele. It's a lot of work, and you know, not all registrars operate in the same fashion. Some, as Colin alluded to, cause you to pay for placement, et cetera, et cetera. So you've got to manage that registrar channel. Other approaches that some registries have experimented with, especially niche domains, is looking for alternative distribution channels, right? So instead of the traditional registrars, if your domain serves a particular niche, are there opportunities to have those domains sold directly through that niche? For example, .realtor was offering their domains through the National Realty Association because their members are the only ones who can technically call themselves a realtor. So is there a vertical or a niche that could open up an opportunity for other non-traditional distribution channels for you? Can you go to an industry association that's targeted for the vertical that your domain serves and get them to be selling those domains to their members or their customers for you? So there are opportunities with niche domains to look for other alternative channels of distribution, and that's something that you should consider, especially if you're not working with a generic domain. With a generic, it'd be kind of hard to do that. With Club, we've had to select different verticals that we focused on from a marketing perspective. I'll talk about that when we get to marketing, which is next. So, aside from the technical responsibilities, really when you cut through the crap, a registry operator is essentially a marketing organization, right? Our role is to create demand for our domains. If we don't do that, no one else is going to do it, right? So we really have to operate as a marketing organization. So with that in mind, you need to think in terms of what's your budget? What are you prepared to spend on that marketing process, right? We as a company decided early on that we were going to invest millions of dollars every year in marketing.club with the hope of becoming a more widespread brand. Making that decision means the path to profitability took a lot longer. So we've only turned to profitability this past year. So now we're operating on a profitable basis. But the early years we were investing heavily in growth, investing heavily in marketing. That's a choice we made. There are other registry operators that are working on a different model, smaller overhead, less investment in marketing, and they could be operating profitably on a much smaller scale. It really depends on what your model is. Once you understand your budget too, it's important for you as the registry operator to truly understand who is the end user for your domain. Who is it really targeted for? Who's going to benefit from using your domain extension? Because not only will you need that information for you to reach out to them and you to create that demand, but it's important for you to feed that information to your registrar partners. They're not going to figure it out. You need to figure it out for them. You need to hand feed them as much information as you can to help them sell your product. So it's really important that you understand who's the market for your domain, and then of course, what's your strategy going to be? And there's a number of different strategies. We've focused a lot on supporting the channel. We invest heavily in the channel, and we also focus a lot in shining a light on our users. Because usage is so important, a lot of our marketing strategy is built upon highlighting and profiling and shining a light on the successful businesses that actually use a .club domain. So you need to decide what your strategy is going to be for your domain. So we talked about it in the channel, verticals, events. We've covered a lot of this stuff really, but in the channel, as mentioned, you have to turn on the channel. Placement fees is something you may have to deal with at many registrars. You have to decide if that makes sense for you or not. Promotions and rebates. So when you see these first year promotions that registrars are offering, they're not doing that out of the goodness of their heart. they're being subsidized by the registry operators. So you have to think in terms of how much are you willing to spend on rebates and promotions with your registrar partners. That's very important. And then advertising. Are you going to also supplement that with advertising, whether that's social media advertising or other stuff? We've experimented with outdoor advertising on buses and taxi cabs. We've done a lot in social media. There's a number of different ways you can promote your domain, so you have to decide what you want to do to support your channel. The challenge for a registry operator is if you're doing advertising, you need to point the consumer of that ad to a conversion, right? So you typically need to point them to a registrar where they can actually buy the domain. Otherwise, you're just throwing branding money out there and you can't measure it. So you'll have to partner with that registrar often to do these ads so that there's a place where they can actually buy the domain. Verticals we talked about briefly. Can you advertise and market in newsletter and publications that reach the verticals that satisfy your domain? We did some stuff in the early days in the CMAA, which is the Club Managers Association of America. So these are all the managers of golf, country clubs, yacht clubs, and we did a lot of marketing towards them, oftentimes through some of their trade publications in that industry. That was very effective. Trade associations again. Schools and training. If your domain fits a niche where there are schools that train people in that field, that industry, that could be a good way to gain exposure for your domain. So you have to think about all the verticals that apply. And events. Colin mentioned that we've attended many events. Obviously, there are domain industry events. Here we are at one right now. But here we're one of many registries at this event, but you can find other events, whether they be marketing events or events in a particular vertical, where you might be the only registry offering a domain at that event, and you'll stand out and get more attention. So events outside of the domain industry can actually be very effective. And we've gone to events in a number of industries where club is relevant, from the bar and nightclub industry to the golf and country club industry that I mentioned, to the subscription box industry. So you've got to find these events in these industries that are relevant for your particular domain. That's really the event side. So really, in summary, before we have time for a few questions, what does a great registry do? Well, a great registry has to, of course, build a brand to create demand. Again, a registry is a marketing operation. You need to create demand for your extension. If you're sitting back and waiting for the registrars to do it, it ain't gonna happen, right? You need to create that demand. A good registry protects its namespace. This is very important, and it's important not just for your registry, but for the industry as a whole. We spend a lot of time and effort and money, as Michele said, cleaning up the .club namespace, fighting abuse, fighting spam. It's a very important obligation of the registry. And then the final thing, you need to support your partners. A great registry is going to support their partners, including their registrars. So we have a few minutes left for any questions for myself, for Colin, Michele. I'd like to open it up, and thank you very much for listening. Any questions?
Did you have something that you want to talk about?
Yeah, anything with that?
Yeah, I was just going to add, just getting back to the topic about economics and education. One thing we talk about a lot is how you, pivot and build your business strategy. One thing that we like to think is, to build a framework, there's two core factors, right? If you want to bring it up to the highest level, one being, like Jeff spoke about, is it generic, right? Like .club, where anything works left of the dot, or is it a vertical, right? Like .horse, for example, is, or .beer, right, Crystal? Right, so those impart very different paths and strategies to success. And then the second core structure that we think about, is the geography. Is it, like a .uno where it caters to Spanish? Or is it like a truly universal word like online might be, or .club might be? So really think about those as you're starting to build your strategy, because it's really going to drive who you hire, right? How much you're spending on marketing, how you're doing the marketing, and how much you're spending in the channel. So it's, and there's variations obviously therein, but it really helps give you direction.
Great. Colin, did you have any final remarks you wanted to mention?
No, I think I hope we didn't really leave the wrong impression. For those who are interested in applying, we're trying to be realistic. But in the end, you can see that if you can get usage, you can get hundreds of thousands of sites, you become entrenched. It's a very strong business. It's very, very much a recurring revenue business. And in my mind, it's one of the best businesses you could ever consider getting into. Just come into it with your eyes wide open.
Any final question? Yes.
Ron DeSilva, ICANN board. First of all, great presentation. Enjoyed the sort of the whole history of .club and providing all the ups and downs and challenges you had. So I enjoyed it immensely. My question is really, you've got over 1 million names. You talked a little bit about just thinking in the context of Namescon. That there's a huge rush from the domainer investor community necessarily, and think about that as somebody is getting into perhaps a new registry operation. Could you share, or do you publish like I imagine your ideal customer base is around clubs and those kind of brands, those activities. So of those 1 million plus, some amount kind of fit into your target audience, I think. But then how much fits into more of the speculative investing side of the domainer community that are looking at really cool strings and just gathering them up and holding them for potentially a return later? Do you share those kind of metrics? Do you break down the 1 million plus into different categories of registrants?
Well, I can say that it changes from day one. From the very beginning, you tend to have a lot more domain investors supporting you in the early stages. As you progress and more end users adopt the domain extension, you begin to rely more on the end users versus the domain investors. I think the domain investors are fatigued. I think there's a lot of inventory on the marketplace, and you just aren't going to get a lot of investment from the domain investor community if you launch a new domain extension. It's just the fact of the situation. Whereas .com still today commands higher value. Even our premium names today sell for about 1% to 2% of the value of the .com. I would say today that we're probably about 70% end users, or people who are thinking about launching a project down the line. Entrepreneurs, and the rest are probably domain speculators, but we don't actually have that exact number.
Yeah. Well, we did break down, as we mentioned earlier, we have, I think it was 260 or 70,000 unique registrants, so it's not just concentrated, and we have over 180,000 single domain registrants, so people only have one .club domain, and of course over 330,000 live websites. So I think it's a pretty good mix, and going forward, as Colin alluded to, it's really growing. The growth is not coming from the domain investors. The growth is coming from the actual end users. Any other questions? Great. Well, thank you very much. Now you can go eat lunch.
Thank you.
We appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you guys. Always a pleasure.